The affair didn't begin with a kiss or a confession. It began with a man I paid to keep our yard tidy. And the moment I realized my wife knew exactly what time he arrived every morning. I didn't notice it at first because it looked like competence. Most mornings, my wife and I moved around each other like people who'd learned the choreography of a shared life. She'd make coffee. I'd check my phone. We'd trade a few sentences that sounded like teamwork. We weren't unhappy. We were managed, functional. The kind of marriage that survives on calendars and good intentions. So when she started waking up earlier, I told myself it was a phase. Health kick. A new burst of motivation. The sort of thing you applaud in your head and forget to ask about out loud. Then the yard began to look better than it ever had. We'd hired a gardener last spring. Nothing dramatic, just a practical choice. I'd been pulling longer hours, and the weekends started to feel like recovery time instead of real time. The hedge line had gone uneven. The flower beds were starting to look tired, and one Sunday I caught myself staring at the weeds like they were a personal failure. She found the guy through a neighborhood post. Local, reliable, quiet, she said, like that was a feature. The kind of person who just gets it done. I remember nodding at the kitchen island, signing off on it like I was approving a minor budget item. I was proud of us for being sensible. The first time I saw him, it was through the window while I was on a call. Wide-brimmed hat, work gloves, a slow, steady pace, like he didn't rush for anyone. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He belonged to the background. For weeks, he stayed there. Background noise, the soft grind of a trimmer, a distant clink of tools. The lawn improved, the hedges sharpened, the roses along the fence finally stopped looking half dead. And my wife started mentioning the yard the way people mention weather. Casually, constantly, like it was always in her mind. Did you see how the roses bounced back? I think the soil needed that new mix. He said the sprinkler heads were misaligned. He said, not the gardener. Not the guy. Just he. Like we both knew him well enough for pronouns. Still, I didn't connect it to anything dangerous. I was a husband, not a detective. I wanted to believe my life was exactly as stable as it looked from the outside. The first real crack came on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that should be forgettable. I had an early meeting that got pushed, so I stayed home longer than usual, scrolling through emails with my coffee cooling beside me. My wife moved through the kitchen in socks, hair loosely tied, humming under her breath. She looked peaceful, like the day hadn't asked anything from her yet. At 8:12, she checked the clock. At 8:14, she checked it again. At 8:16, she walked to the back window and stared out for a second too long. I watched her do it, and something in my chest shifted. Not panic, not certainty, just a quiet awareness. Like noticing, for the first time, that a door in your house doesn't quite close all the way. Expecting a delivery? I asked, forcing my tone into casual. She smiled without turning around. No, just making sure the yard's fine. At 8:19, the low hum of a truck reached us through the glass. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. My wife's shoulders softened, like a tension had released. And there it was, the moment I realized she didn't just know he was coming. She knew exactly when. I stood up slowly, as if my body needed to respect how fragile the moment was. I walked to the window beside her. His truck rolled to a stop near the side gate. He got out with the same quiet efficiency I'd seen before. Hat, gloves, tools, background. Except my wife wasn't watching him like background. She was watching him like a clock that had finally struck the right hour. I looked at her face from the side. The slight lift at the corner of her mouth. The softness around her eyes. It wasn't joy exactly. It was something more private. Something practiced. She didn't notice me watching her, because she was too focused on him. He opened the gate, stepped through, and paused, just briefly, as if he could feel our eyes on him. Then he looked up, not at me, at her. And in that split second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with landscaping. No waving, no obvious gesture, just recognition, familiarity, the quiet confidence of people who have already agreed on a story. My wife's fingers touched the edge of the curtain, not pulling it closed, just resting there, like she didn't even realize she was doing it. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. "Since when does he come on Tuesdays?" I asked. Her eyes blinked once, too slow. She turned toward me, smile still there, but rearranged, like she'd remembered she was supposed to be someone else. "Oh," she said lightly, "he's always been flexible. It just depends." That was the first lie I heard clearly as a lie, because I suddenly knew something I hadn't known 10 seconds earlier. She wasn't simply responding. She was choosing what I was allowed to understand. I nodded like I believed her. That's what shocked me most later, that I could still perform normalcy while my mind was quietly reorganizing every memory from the past few months. I watched him unload his tools. I watched my wife drift away from the kitchen toward the hallway, her steps unhurried. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Just to grab something," she called back, voice breezy. A moment later, I heard the back door unlock. The soft click of it wasn't loud, but it landed in me like a bell. I stayed frozen at the window as she stepped onto the patio, still in socks, still holding the easy posture of a woman stepping into something familiar. She didn't head toward the mailbox. She didn't look around like someone who'd just remembered an errand. She walked straight toward the garden beds along the fence, toward him, like she was following a path she'd taken before. And when she stopped a few feet away, he lifted his head again, and this time he smiled. Not polite, not neutral. A real smile. The kind you don't give to a client's wife unless you've forgotten, or never cared, who's paying you. My coffee sat untouched on the counter behind me, cooling into bitterness. Outside, my wife said something I couldn't hear, and he leaned slightly closer to catch it. That was the moment my marriage stopped feeling like a place I lived. It started feeling like a place I was being kept out of. ACT2, escalation. Once you notice the pattern, it stops being invisible. That's the part no one tells you. They talk about discovery like it's a single moment. One text, one confession, one undeniable scene. But for me, it was subtler. It was the slow, sickening realization that my wife had been living on a schedule I didn't share, one she'd memorized down to the minute. After that morning, I did what a lot of people do when the ground beneath them starts to shift. I pretended everything was fine. I kissed her goodbye. I answered emails. I laughed at the right moments. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inwardly, I started keeping quiet notes. The gardener came every Tuesday and Friday. That much I confirmed quickly. Not from invoices or emails. Those were vague, but from her body language. On those days, she dressed differently. Nothing dramatic. Just intentional. Cleaner lines. Softer fabrics. The kind of outfit you don't notice unless you're suddenly paying attention to what someone wears when they expect to be seen. She also stopped asking me when I'd be home. That should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like absence. Like my presence had stopped factoring into her calculations. The yard kept improving. It became immaculate in a way that bordered on obsessive. Edges crisp, beds perfect. Every leaf exactly where it was supposed to be. I'd step outside and feel like I was standing in a magazine spread instead of a place where a family lived. "Looks amazing," I said one afternoon, forcing enthusiasm. She smiled. He really takes pride in his work. There it was again. He. I tried, at first, to reinsert myself. I offered to handle the yard one weekend, told her I could trim the hedges myself, maybe save us some money. She laughed, too quickly, too lightly, and told me not to bother. You're always exhausted, she said. Let him handle it. Let him handle it. The words lodged in me. I wasn't tired enough to miss what was happening, but I was tired enough to doubt my right to question it. So instead of confronting her, I started doing something worse. I watched. Not obsessively. Not every moment. Just enough to confirm that what I'd felt wasn't paranoia. Just enough to keep my suspicions fed without giving them an outlet. From the window of my office, I saw them talk longer than necessary. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that their conversations weren't meant for anyone else. I noticed the way she angled her body toward him, how she laughed with a softness she didn't use on me anymore. I told myself it was harmless. People talk. People connect. That doesn't automatically mean betrayal. But then came the small changes inside the house. Her phone stopped living on the counter. It stayed face down, or in her pocket, or locked. Notifications silenced. When I walked into a room, she didn't jump, but she did adjust. A thumb moving, a screen dimming. At night, she turned away, sooner. We still touched, but it felt like obligation had replaced desire. Like she was paying rent on a space she no longer lived in. One Friday, I came home early without telling her. I wasn't trying to catch anything. I didn't even realize at the time that I'd planned it. I just felt the pull of wanting to see what the house looked like when I wasn't expected. Her car was in the driveway. The yard was quiet. No truck. No tools. No movement. Inside, the house was dim, curtains half drawn. I heard her voice from the back of the house. Not loud, not hushed. Familiar. Comfortable. She was on the phone. I stopped in the hallway, my keys still in my hand, listening without meaning to. She was laughing. Not the polite laugh she used with friends. Not the social one. The unguarded kind. The kind that slips out when you forget you're being observed. I know, she said softly. I told you. He won't be home yet. I didn't hear the response, but I heard the silence afterward. The kind of silence that stretches because both people are smiling on the other end. I'll see you soon, she added. I stepped back before she could notice me, my heart pounding loud enough that I was sure it would give me away. I waited a full minute before opening the front door loudly, deliberately, announcing myself like a guest in my own home. She emerged a moment later, phone already gone, expression reset. Hey, she said. You're early. Meeting got canceled, I replied. She nodded. Lucky you. The lie sat between us, like furniture we both pretended not to see. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, anger comes later, but because my mind kept replaying the same thought. She is planning around me. The next Tuesday, I tested something small. I told her I'd be working from home all morning. She paused. Just a fraction of a second. Oh, she said. That's nice. At 8:15, she checked the clock. At 8:17, she checked her phone. At 8:19, no truck arrived. At 8:30, she excused herself to take a shower. At 8:42, my phone buzzed with a calendar update I hadn't created. A meeting I didn't recognize. Something she must have added from our shared account. I stared at it, understanding settling in with quiet certainty. She hadn't just memorized his schedule. She was adjusting mine. By the time I heard the truck pull in, late, careful, as if timing mattered, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't friendliness. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination. I stood at the window again, watching the two of them occupy the same space with practiced ease. Watching my wife smile in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. And for the first time, I felt something sharper than suspicion. I felt excluded from my own life. That was when I understood the danger wasn't what they might be doing. It was what they'd already decided I didn't need to know. By then, Tuesdays no longer felt like days. They felt like appointments I wasn't invited to. After the calendar incident, I stopped pretending I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I did something quieter and more dangerous. I began letting the pattern continue, just to see how far it would go without me interrupting it. That's how I learned the rules. On Tuesdays and Fridays, she didn't ask when I'd be home. On Tuesdays and Fridays, she wore softer clothes. On Tuesdays and Fridays, the roses along the fence were the excuse. And on Tuesdays and Fridays, if my schedule changed unexpectedly, hers adjusted faster than mine ever could. The rainstorm came on a Tuesday. It was mid-afternoon, sudden and loud, the kind that turns the sky the color of unfinished thoughts. My last meeting ended early. Too early. I sat in my car afterward, engine off, listening to the rain hit the roof and realizing something unsettling. She thought I was gone. Not busy. Not late. Gone. That knowledge carried me home. The gardener's truck was already there when I turned onto our street, parked closer to the house than usual, not tucked near the fence, not out of the way, as if discretion had become unnecessary. I didn't rush inside. I didn't brace myself. I moved the way I had for weeks, quietly, carefully, like someone who already knows the answer and is just verifying the math. The house smelled warm, closed in. The rain had sealed it. I heard her before I saw her. Not words, breath. Familiar sounds I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. The back room. The one she'd always called unused. The one that never mattered until Tuesdays. I stopped at the doorway. They weren't scrambling. They weren't startled yet. They weren't hiding. That was the worst part. He was close enough to her that his presence looked practiced. Her body leaned toward him without hesitation, without urgency, like this was something they'd done before and expected to do again. Her hands rested against him with a comfort that told me this wasn't the beginning of anything. It was the middle. She noticed me first. Her eyes opened, and in them I saw not surprise, but calculation failing, like a schedule collapsing in real time. Her body stiffened, pulling away too late to reclaim the version of herself she'd been presenting to me for months. He turned next. I recognized the look immediately. The one I'd seen through the window. The confidence that came from repetition. It disappeared the second he saw me. He started. I raised my hand, not in anger, in finality. Get your things, I said. My voice didn't shake, which felt almost unfair. And leave. He hesitated, just long enough to glance at her. That glance connected everything. The mornings, the clock watching, the calendar edits, the roses. I understood then that I hadn't been replaced emotionally by accident. I'd been worked around. Now, I said. He didn't argue. He grabbed his jacket, his hat. His roll finished the moment it was exposed. When he passed me, he wouldn't meet my eyes. The door closed behind him with a sound so ordinary it felt insulting. My wife stood there, arms folded around herself, suddenly stripped of the narrative she'd been maintaining. She looked smaller, not guilty, not ashamed, just caught without preparation. How long? I asked. Silence. I nodded once. That was your chance. She swallowed. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I let out a quiet laugh. Not cruel. Tired. You didn't mean for me to find out at all. That's not true, she said too quickly. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. She looked away. I gestured around the room. After you moved another meeting? After you shifted another Tuesday? After I stopped noticing? Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. It just happened. I stepped closer, not aggressively, but deliberately. No, it didn't. You scheduled this. You planned this. You adjusted my life so this could exist. That landed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I need you to leave tonight, I said. Her head snapped up. Where would I go? For the first time since this began, I felt clear, calm, detached. You've already been deciding where you go, I said. Just not with me. She looked at me like she was waiting for negotiation, for compromise, for the version of me that would preserve the structure even as it collapsed. I didn't give her that. I walked out of the room and sat at the kitchen table, the same place I'd sat weeks earlier when her phone first buzzed. I listened as she gathered things, drawers opening, closets shifting, the sound of a life being reorganized again, this time without my consent or her control. When the front door finally closed, I didn't follow her. I stayed where I was, hands flat on the table, staring at the yard through the rain-streaked window. The roses along the fence stood perfectly trimmed, and for the first time, I understood exactly how long they'd been tended for someone else. The house didn't feel empty after she left. It felt paused. I stayed at the kitchen table long after the rain stopped, watching the water slip from the leaves outside and collect at the edge of the patio. The yard looked perfect, better than it ever had when it was just ours. That detail kept catching on my thoughts, like a burr you can't brush away. By nightfall, the silence had learned the shape of her absence. No footsteps, no low music drifting from the bedroom, no voice asking what I wanted for dinner. The quiet wasn't dramatic. It was administrative, as if the house were closing accounts. She texted once, a single line. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. I slept poorly, drifting in and out, the same images replaying without color. Her watching the clock, the calendar notification, the way she'd leaned into him without urgency. The middle, not the beginning, the part where decisions have already been made. Morning brought a clarity that surprised me. Not peace, clarity. I showered, dressed, and drank coffee standing up, the way I used to before we learned each other's rhythms. When I stepped outside, the roses caught my eye again. Perfect edges, fresh soil, the evidence of care without belonging. I did the one thing I'd avoided for weeks. I opened our shared calendar. It took less than a minute to see it once I stopped pretending not to. Small edits, repeated shifts, meetings added and removed, blocks of time labeled innocently, errand, house stuff, that lined up too neatly with Tuesdays and Fridays. It wasn't proof of intimacy. It was proof of management. I realized then that confrontation wouldn't give me what I needed. I already had the truth. What I needed was a decision that matched it. She came back that afternoon, tentative, like someone returning to a place after a fire. She stood just inside the doorway, keys still in hand, eyes scanning me for cues I didn't offer. "I stayed with my sister," she said. I nodded. "Okay." She waited for more, for anger, for questions, for something she could respond to. "Can we talk?" she asked. I gestured to the chairs at the table. We sat across from each other, like people meeting to dissolve a company. "I don't want this to end like this," she said. "I never wanted to hurt you." I believed her, and that was the problem. "Hurt isn't the point," I said. "Choice is." She frowned slightly, as if the word didn't fit her narrative. "I made a mistake." I shook my head. "A mistake is spilling coffee on a report. You rearranged my life so I wouldn't see yours." Her eyes dropped. "I felt invisible," she said quietly. "I didn't think you noticed me anymore." I let the silence stretch, not to punish her, but to give the words space to land where they belonged. "I noticed," I said. "I noticed you leaving earlier. I noticed the phone disappearing. I noticed you planning around me. I noticed you saving the best parts of yourself for a window of time you thought I didn't occupy." She looked up, startled. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because saying something would have forced a choice before I was ready to make it." I didn't say that. I didn't need to. "I was trying to see who you were becoming," I said, "and who I was becoming by staying quiet." She reached across the table, stopped herself, pulled her hand back. What do you want now? The question hung there, heavy with the expectation that I'd negotiate, that I'd bargain for pieces of what we used to be. I want the truth, I said. All of it. Not to fix this. To decide what comes next. She took a breath and began. Not with details, I didn't ask for those, but with admissions. How long it had been more than talk. How the routine made it easier. How she told herself it wasn't real because it lived in daylight and ended before dinner. How she convinced herself that as long as she kept our evenings intact, she wasn't dismantling anything essential. Listening hurt, but it also clarified. This wasn't a crisis born of neglect. It was a life split into compartments, each carefully maintained. When she finished, I felt the weight of the choice settle fully into my hands. I can forgive, I said slowly, but forgiveness isn't the same as continuing. Her breath caught. So you're leaving. I looked around the kitchen, the place where we'd planned trips, argued about paint colors, learned how to be quieter with each other over time. I'm choosing not to live in a life that needs me absent to function, I said. Tears came then, finally, but they didn't move me the way they once would have. Not because I didn't care, because I did. We talked logistics, calmly, dates, boxes, who would stay where, and for how long. The conversation felt unreal in its civility, like the aftermath of a storm where the damage is obvious, but no one is screaming. When she stood to leave again, she hesitated at the door. I never meant to replace you. I know, I said. You just learned how to live without me noticing. She nodded, tears tracing familiar lines, and stepped out. That evening, I went back outside alone. The yard was quiet. No truck, no schedule. The roses caught the last of the light, immaculate and impersonal. I understood then that the hardest part of this wasn't losing her. It was accepting that the version of me who stayed silent had helped make this possible, and deciding never to be him again. The unexpected part wasn't what she did next. It was what I did. For weeks after she moved out, people treated me like I was fragile glass. Friends checked in too often. Family spoke slowly, like grief required a softer volume. Everyone assumed I was standing at the edge of something broken, staring down into it. I let them believe that. It was easier than explaining the truth. The truth was that once the noise stopped, something in me finally settled. The house changed quickly. Not in obvious ways. No dramatic redecorating. No symbolic bonfire of shared memories. It changed in how it responded to me. I woke when I wanted. I ate when I was hungry. I noticed my own thoughts without having to edit them for someone else's comfort. On Tuesdays and Fridays, the silence felt intentional. I canceled the gardening service, not out of spite, just closure. When I made the call, my voice didn't shake. I didn't ask for explanations or refunds. The woman on the phone sounded relieved, like she'd been waiting for that conversation. A week later, I ran into him anyway. Not at the house, at the grocery store. I was standing in the produce aisle, absently comparing apples, when I felt that familiar, unwelcome tightening in my chest, the sense of being observed. I looked up, and there he was, hatless, ordinary, suddenly stripped of the role he'd played so confidently in my life. He froze when he saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. No anger surged through me. No urge to confront. Just curiosity, sharp and almost clinical. I didn't know, he said quietly, like he'd rehearsed it. At first. I believed him. That surprised me more than anything. I figured you deserved to hear that, he added. Not that it changes anything. No, I said. It doesn't. We stood there a moment longer, two men briefly connected by a story that was already losing relevance. Then I picked up my apples and walked away. That should have been the end. It wasn't. The real ending arrived months later, disguised as a favor. Her sister called one evening, voice tight, asking if I could come by and help with something. Paperwork, boxes, the kind of thing that pretends to be logistical when it's really emotional. I hesitated, then agreed. Not for her, for myself. I wanted to see if the past still had gravity. It didn't. My wife, my former wife, was thinner, quieter, not devastated. Just reset. We spoke politely, carefully, like people who'd once shared a language they no longer needed. While sorting through a box in the garage, I found something unexpected. A notebook. My notebook. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Mine. But the content didn't make sense at first. Pages of thoughts I'd written years ago, during a period when I'd been struggling at work. Doubts. Fears. Plans I'd never said out loud. She'd kept it. Not hidden. Preserved. I stood there holding it, feeling the final piece click into place. She hadn't cheated because she didn't love me. She cheated because she loved a version of me I'd stopped being, and didn't know how to reach the one who replaced him. That realization didn't send me back to her. It sent me forward. I handed her the notebook without comment. She looked at it, eyes widening, and for the first time since everything ended, I saw her understand something she couldn't undo. I left shortly after. The unexpected ending wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't loneliness. It was clarity. I sold the house the following spring, not because it hurt, but because it had done its job. I moved somewhere smaller, quieter. I planted my own garden, not roses, vegetables, things that required patience and honest care. Sometimes, on Tuesdays, I still wake early. Not because I'm waiting for something, because I finally know what I'm growing and who it's for.